So we're back, and in this segment we're going to talk about the hip and base boards, or in Bootstrap Farmer's case, the hip and base brace for our all-metal kit. You wanted to hop in and say that some of these nomenclatures kind of run the gambit, so what about that for a sec?
I get questions a lot. So depending on where you are, they refer to it differently. So we call it hip and brace. There's hip and baseboards. There's ribbon boards. You may have a different term for it, but it is the bottom lateral piece that runs along the base of the structure. And then above that would be your hip board or ribbon board that we're going to talk about on the side of the structure. So it can be anywhere from 4 feet to say 6 feet tall, depending on how tall you want your opening on the sides.
So yeah, that's another question that we get is we don't really say in the instructions. In the past, we haven't really said in the instructions how far up that hip base needs to be, because I've seen it run the gambit. Most people are going to put that right at 4 foot. I tend to see 6 foot down in southern states like Florida, Texas, anywhere in the South where they're trying to get more ventilation. And I rarely see it below 4 foot, so just kind of keep that in mind, although I have seen it. The other thing to keep in mind on smaller structures, especially ones that you're not using a roll-up side, you may not even have a hip brace. So kind of keep that in mind as well. So for most folks, they're going to use a wood 1x. We've kind of covered that before. Some type of either pressure treated or some type of pine is going to be, it's not touching the ground and it's covered by plastic. So you really don't have to worry about that rotting out, although you may want to replace it every now and then. But for what we do at Bootstrap Farmer with our all-metal kit is we use a component called hat channel. And what hat channel is just imagine a flat table and you had 2 ears going up at a slight, trapezoid shape with a flat top. And that flat top is where we are going to eventually attach the lock channel. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, this is different from a lot of other people's metal that they'll use for their hip and brace, which tends to be a 1 or a 1.5 inch piece of square tubing. The reason we chose not to use that is because that's a single point of contact. So if you have a single point of contact along 2 points of ribs, you can have this motion of raking back and forth because it's acting like a pivot. Now with the hat channel, we have 2 ears, and so 2 ears gives us 2 points of contact. So it really stiffens up this whole structure, and we've been really pleased with the way that works. So the base function is basically a board, or like in our case, that metal banding that's going to go all around the base. It's going to go on the long part of the hoop house. Ours extends all the way around because it becomes part of the end walls. Some people, if you're doing a wood frame construction, you may just have a base plate, and that's just a detail that you'll have to work out with whatever instructions and whatever kit that you're going to do. So I kind of look at the base serving 2 functions. Number one, the ground posts are in there pretty solid, but it's just like this extra little bit of connective tissue all the way around, and it really helps those ground posts just stay as solid as humanly possible. Number 2, it kind of keeps water, like if you ever have a rain event, it's just an added layer of protection from keeping that coming in. And number 3, whether you're mulching or you have rocks, whatever type of flooring system, as long as it's not landscape fabric, but if you have a loose floor system like that, kind of keeps that corralled. So it has a couple of different functions. So keep in mind, I personally like to do the hip board first because the ground posts are already pretty much set. The last little bit of adjusting that you have an opportunity to do for the hips is that hip board. So at this point, if you're connected up top and you're connected at the bottom and you still may need to make a little tweak, this is where that hip board comes into play. So why don't you talk about that?
So the hip board, again, we talked about, it could be 4 feet above the baseboard. It could be up to 6 feet above it, and it runs laterally down the side. It is the base for your roll-up sides. So the plastic's going to come over the hoops. It will attach at the hip board, and then your roll-up sides can roll up from there, up and down. And it's another point of connection on that hoop. So between the baseboard and the ridge pole at the top. So if you're looking at the side of the hoop, it's another connection point 4 feet off the ground that, again, ties all the hoops together. And then in our case with the hat channel, you have two connection points, one at the top and the bottom of the hat channel that spreads the load out.
Yeah, and I really like, a lot of people get confused about where that roll-up side starts. And so whenever I tell them that hip board is the top of that roll-up side, which is basically a door or a window, that really seems to clarify for a lot of folks. So again, if you have wood hip and base, you're going to drill that. You're going to drill it through the hoop and most likely attach a carriage bolt with a nut and a washer on the back. And in our case, with a hat channel on the hoop, we use a number 10 self-tapping screw. When you're installing this, there's a couple of things I like to talk about as far as efficiencies go. Number one, I like to do one row at a time, i.e., let's do all the base and then let's do all of the hip, because I don't want to juggle all this stuff. The other thing I like to do is go ahead and run the base. You know, you're going to splice it, and we're going to talk about splices in a second. But I do like to offset the splices of the hip.
So on your hip board or your baseboard, you're going to want to start with your first piece and cut 2 feet off of the end of it. So that, remember, our spacing is 4 foot on the hoops. If you have an 8-foot board that you start with and you install it, well, then your splice to the next board is going to be right in the center of the hoop. If you cut the first 2 feet off of the 8-foot board, that's going to move your splice in between the next 2 hoops, so that it makes it easy to put your splice together because it's not going to be on the hoop itself.
Right. And so with the efficiencies that we've talked about, you know, running one board, having somebody just ahead of you, you know, putting those boards or handing you those boards, what you want to do is eliminate a bunch of extra movement and your labor. So, I mean, as much as of a pain as it is, getting on the ground and staying on the ground without having to get up and go get the next piece or get up and refill your screws, that's where having a helping hand really helps out. 2 people on one side, hopefully both people have some type of a drill to put this in, and you have somebody else running this for you. So let's really save that efficiency on the labor. The second thing in one of our talking points is clamps. Even if you're not by yourself, having clamps hold these things for you. There's so many instances in where you're gonna want to wish that you had a clamp. I really like the ones that you squeeze together, and in the video you can kind of see an example of that. But I really like the ones that have just a little bit of a rubber covering over the clamp itself. Kind of helps squishes it down, and I think it helps hold it in place without walking it around.
Yeah, it gives it a little bit more grip just on the metal surfaces.
And I think we've found that, I mean, 4 clamps is minimum what you have to put one of these structures up. But if you have any more, just it's all great, because you're going to forget one and leave it around. So the more that you have to kind of juggle and carry around with, it's really going to help. The next thing we need to talk about, and the final thing on the hip and baseboard, Julian was talking about splices a minute ago. Anywhere that these 2 boards, whether that's wood boards or our metal boards, they're going to have to be connected together so they're not just floating out in space and moving independently. So for wood, you're going to cut, some people like to cut the full 4 foot in between and really splice that up. I think that's a bit of an overkill. I mean, 8 inches to 12 inches of board is going to be plenty. For wood, you're just going to put that splice piece on the back side. Don't put it in the front, because then you're going to interfere with your aluminum lock channel. But if you put it on the back, you screw it from the top. That way you're not getting the screw tips into the plastic, and it's just connecting those 2 boards together. Now on our splice, we wanted this to just be obnoxiously strong. So we have 10 inches of square tubing that we have a lamination process that pretty much on the back side. So in the cavity of the hat channel, we then put that square tubing in, and it becomes, you know, much stronger than even the hat channel itself. So the splice actually winds up being one of the stronger points. So other than that, keep the splices on the back. You don't have to overkill it. And then that takes us to our next talking point, which is going to be the lock channel.